My name is Ella Williams, 35, and I've always believed tough love made strong children. That conviction shattered last Tuesday when my 17-year-old son James looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You taught me love means pain." Those 6 words replayed in my mind like a broken record as I drove home in silence, my hands shaking against the steering wheel. How did we get here? When did my intention to raise a resilient boy turn into something that wounded him so deeply? Before I share what happened, let me know where you're watching from and don't forget to like and subscribe for more real stories. I grew up in a household where emotions were considered a weakness. My parents, both successful professionals, believed that showing vulnerability was a flaw that needed to be corrected. My father, a retired military officer, would often say, "Crying doesn't solve problems, action does." My mother, a corporate attorney, echoed this sentiment with her own mantra: "The world doesn't care how you feel, only what you accomplish." When I brought home a B+ on my report card, they wouldn't congratulate me on my effort. Instead, they'd ask why it wasn't an A. When I lost a swim meet, there were no comforting hugs, just a stern lecture about training harder. Their approach wasn't cruel by design. They genuinely believed they were preparing me for a harsh world. I met Michael during my sophomore year of college. He was handsome, driven, and shared my vision of success. Like me, he came from a family that valued achievement over emotional expression. His father had been a Marine, and Michael often spoke about the discipline that shaped him into the determined man he'd become. We fell in love quickly, bonding over our similar upbringings and ambitions. After graduation, we married and settled into careers, Michael as an investment banker, and me as a high school guidance counselor. The irony wasn't lost on me even then. I chose a profession dedicated to supporting struggling teenagers while carrying my own emotional baggage. When I became pregnant with James at 28, I swore I would be different from my parents. I would be supportive, understanding, and emotionally available. But as the saying goes, old habits die hard. Despite my best intentions, I found myself falling back on the patterns I knew. James was born with a full head of dark hair and curious blue eyes that seemed to take in everything. From the beginning, he was sensitive, easily startled by loud noises and quick to cry when upset. Michael viewed these traits with concern. "We need to toughen him up," he said one night as James wailed in his crib. "Boys who cry become men who can't handle pressure." Though something inside me wanted to protest, I found myself nodding in agreement. After all, wasn't that what my parents had taught me? That resilience came from overcoming discomfort, rather than being sheltered from it. As James grew from infant to toddler to school-aged child, our parenting philosophy solidified around this core belief. Life is hard, and children need to learn that early. When 3-year-old James fell at the playground and scraped his knee instead of immediately scooping him up, I'd say, "You're okay, brush it off. Big boys don't make a fuss over little things." When he was 5 and cried because another child took his toy, Michael would tell him, "Nobody respects a crybaby, stand up for yourself." We weren't cruel. We hugged him, told him we loved him. But we also made it clear that emotional displays were discouraged. "Control yourself" became a common phrase in our household. In parent-teacher conferences, we'd beam with pride when teachers described James as mature for his age and self-sufficient. What we didn't recognize then was that his independence wasn't entirely healthy. It was a defense mechanism. He'd learned early that his emotional needs might not be met, so he stopped expressing them. On the surface, we appeared to be the perfect American family. Our Christmas card showed 3 smiling faces against seasonal backgrounds. Michael coached James's Little League team. I volunteered at school functions. We took family vacations to Disney World and the Grand Canyon. But beneath that polished exterior, emotional distance was growing. Then came the divorce. James was 12, and though Michael and I tried to make the separation amicable, the tension in our home had been building for years. We'd grown apart, our communication reduced to logistics and arguments. The same emotional repression that shaped our parenting had corroded our marriage. In the aftermath, James became even more self-contained. With Michael moved out and me working longer hours to support us, James learned to fend for himself. I told myself this was good. He was becoming independent, resilient. I didn't see how much he was hurting. The changes began subtly. James, once an engaged student who raised his hand in class and participated in discussions, became increasingly withdrawn during his middle school years. His teachers mentioned it during conferences. James is very quiet lately. But I interpreted this as maturity, even a positive sign that he was growing up. He's just becoming more thoughtful. I told his 8th grade English teacher, Mrs. Patterson, when she expressed concern about his reluctance to join group activities. James has always been more mature than his peers. What I didn't want to acknowledge was that James wasn't just quiet, he was retreating. The enthusiastic boy who once bounded through the front door, eager to share stories about his day, had been replaced by a teenager who went straight to his room door firmly closed. I remember clearly the first time I noticed James had stopped sharing his achievements with me. He was 14 and had won first place in a school science competition with a project on renewable energy. I only found out when I stumbled across the blue ribbon while doing laundry. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" I asked, holding up the ribbon at dinner that night. James shrugged, pushing peas around his plate. "Didn't seem important." "Of course it's important," I insisted. "I would have come to the award ceremony." "It's fine, Mom," he said without looking up. "You were busy with work anyway." His words stung because they were true. After the divorce, I'd thrown myself into my career, working longer hours as a guidance counselor and taking on additional responsibilities. I told myself it was necessary to support us financially, but in retrospect, it was also an escape from my failed marriage. Around this time, I started dating Ryan, a fellow teacher from my school. He was kind and steady, offering a stability I craved after the tumultuous end of my marriage. But my relationship with Ryan further divided my already limited attention. James's grades began to slip during his freshman year of high school. When his report card showed mostly B's and C's instead of his usual A's, I confronted him with disappointment rather than concern. "What's happening with your grades?" I demanded. "You're too smart to be bringing home C's." "I'm trying," he said flatly. "Well, try harder," I replied. "This is your future we're talking about. Colleges don't accept mediocrity." The hypocrisy of my approach wasn't lost on me even then. At school, I counseled struggling students with empathy and patience, helping them identify the root causes of their academic difficulties. I discussed emotional well-being and learning styles, stress management, and healthy coping mechanisms. But at home with my own son, I reverted to the black and white thinking of my parents: achieve or fail, succeed or disappoint. The contrast between how I treated my students and how I treated James grew starker as time went on. With them, I was the counselor who listened without judgment, who saw beyond test scores to the whole child. With him, I was critical and demanding, focusing on outcomes rather than effort or emotional health. In an attempt to please me, James tried out for the baseball team his sophomore year. I knew he had little interest in sports. Art had always been his passion. But I encouraged the tryout, believing team activities would build character. "Physical activity will be good for you," I told him. "And colleges love well-rounded applicants." He made the junior varsity team, but spent most games on the bench. Meanwhile, his sketchbooks filled with increasingly dark, intricate drawings that I rarely took time to examine. When James expressed interest in applying to a summer art program, I dismissed the idea as impractical. "Art is a nice hobby," I said, "but it's not a realistic career path. Focus on something with better prospects." The light in his eyes dimmed a little more with each such exchange. He stopped sharing his artwork altogether, and I was too busy to notice its absence from our refrigerator door or the walls of his room. During his freshman year, James formed a close bond with his art teacher, Mrs. Kaplan, a warm, eccentric woman with wild gray hair and paint-splattered clothes. I was vaguely aware that he spent lunch periods in her classroom, but I didn't recognize the significance of this relationship, that my son had found in her, the emotional support and validation I wasn't providing. Looking back, the signs of growing tension were everywhere. James's monosyllabic responses to my questions, the dark circles under his eyes from nights spent awake long after I'd gone to bed, the increasingly long periods he spent alone in his room. But I was too caught up in my own life, my job, my relationship with Ryan, my belief that emotional distance equated to healthy independence, to see what was happening. The gap between us widened with each passing month. What I saw as raising a self-sufficient young man was actually creating an emotional chasm neither of us knew how to bridge. The first major confrontation came on James's 16th birthday. I'd spent considerable time selecting what I thought were perfect gifts: a leather-bound planner for organizing college applications, a new laptop for schoolwork, and a set of professional clothes for interviews. Practical gifts that would help prepare him for the future I envisioned. What I hadn't bought were the art supplies on the list he'd casually left on the kitchen counter weeks earlier: expensive drawing pencils, professional-grade sketch pads, and watercolors. In my mind, these were frivolous compared to the practical items I'd chosen. The disappointment on his face when he opened the last present was unmistakable, though he tried to hide it behind a polite smile. "Thanks, Mom, these are really nice," he said, his voice flat as he set aside the button-down shirt I'd purchased. "You don't sound very grateful," I remarked, irritation rising in my throat. "These things cost a lot of money, you know." "I said thank you," James replied, a hint of defiance in his tone. "With an attitude like that, maybe you don't deserve any presents," I snapped. Something in him broke then. The carefully constructed wall of politeness crumbled, and years of repressed feelings burst forth. "What I wanted was on that list I gave you," he said, voice rising. "Just once couldn't you have gotten something I actually asked for instead of what you think I should want?" "Those art supplies were expensive and impractical," I countered. "I bought you things you need for your future." "My future or yours?" he challenged, standing up from the table. "You don't care about what I want. You never have." "That's not fair," I protested. "Everything I do is for your benefit." "No," he said, eyes flashing with anger. "Everything you do is about controlling me, making me into what you think I should be." "I'm your mother," I said, my voice hard. "I know what's best for you." "You don't even know me," he shot back. Then came the words that should have been a wake-up call. "The world doesn't care about your feelings, and neither should you." "That's what you always say, right?" "Well, message received loud and clear." He walked out of the room, leaving his birthday presents untouched on the table. I heard his bedroom door slam, and instead of following him, instead of trying to understand, I cleaned up the wrapping paper and told myself he was being a typical ungrateful teenager. 2 weeks later, I was searching for a missing bill in the living room when I accidentally knocked over James's backpack. As I gathered the scattered contents, a leather-bound journal fell open. I knew I should close it immediately, respect his privacy, but a sentence caught my eye. "Sometimes I wonder if she would notice if I disappeared completely." My hands trembled as I read further. "Nothing I do is ever good enough. Nothing I feel matters. I'm just a project to be completed, a reflection of her success or failure as a parent. I'm tired of being invisible in my own home." I snapped the journal shut, heart racing with a mixture of guilt and defensive anger. These were just teenage dramatics, I told myself. All teenagers feel misunderstood. James was fine. He was strong, independent, exactly what I'd raised him to be. I replaced the journal and never mentioned finding it. Instead, I watched him more closely in the following days, searching for signs of serious distress. But James had become an expert at hiding his feelings, a skill I'd unwittingly taught him. The parent-teacher conference that followed shortly after should have been another warning. Mrs. Kaplan, James's art teacher, requested a private meeting. "I'm concerned about James," she said gently when we sat down in her colorful classroom. "His artwork has taken a disturbing turn lately. There are themes of isolation, abandonment." "He's a teenager," I said dismissively. "They all go through moody phases." "This seems like more than a phase," she persisted, showing me some of his recent work. Dark, fractured self-portraits, figures alone in empty spaces. "I believe James may be depressed." "He's fine," I insisted, bristling at her suggestion. "He's just sensitive. Always has been." "Sensitivity isn't a flaw, Ms. Williams," she said quietly. "It's a strength, especially in an artist. James has extraordinary talent. He just needs support to develop it." "What he needs is to focus on academics," I replied. "Art is a hobby, not a future." Mrs. Kaplan's disappointment was palpable. "With all due respect, I think you're missing who your son really is." I left the meeting angry and defensive, but a seed of doubt had been planted. What if she was right? What if I had been so focused on molding James into my idea of success that I'd failed to see who he actually was? Reluctantly, I scheduled an appointment with a therapist for James, telling him it was just a routine check-in. Nothing serious. When the therapist Dr. Levine requested a session with me afterward, I went in confident that she would confirm what I believed, that James was fine just going through normal teenage adjustment. Instead, she gently but firmly introduced the concept of emotional neglect. From what James has shared, he feels his emotional needs aren't recognized or validated, she explained. He's learned to suppress his feelings because expressing them doesn't yield support. That's ridiculous, I protested. James knows I love him. I've given him everything he needs. Material needs, yes, Dr. Levine acknowledged. But emotional needs are equally important for healthy development. I left that session convinced the therapist had overreacted to typical teenage complaints. I didn't schedule a follow-up. In retrospect, this was perhaps my greatest failure as a parent, the moment when professional intervention might have changed our course, and I dismissed it out of hand. The night of the school art exhibition marked our crisis point. I'd promised James I would attend, but an emergency counseling session with a suicidal student kept me at work late. I called to explain, but James didn't answer. By the time I reached home, it was almost 10, and the house was dark. I found James sitting in the unlit living room, still dressed in the button-down shirt and slacks he'd worn for the exhibition. "I'm so sorry I missed it," I said, flipping on a lamp. "There was an emergency at school. A student was in trouble." "It's fine," he said, his voice hollow. "It doesn't matter." "Of course it matters," I insisted. "I wanted to be there. I'll make it up to you." "How?" he asked, finally looking at me. "How exactly do you make up for never being there when it counts?" "That's not fair," I protested. "I had a legitimate reason tonight." "You always have a reason," he said quietly. "Work Ryan appointments. There's always something more important than me." "That's not true," I argued, feeling defensive. "Everything I do is for you." "No," he said, his voice breaking. "Everything you do is for your idea of who I should be, not for who I actually am." "James, do you have any idea what tonight meant to me?" he continued, tears welling in his eyes. "Mrs. Kaplan selected my work for the featured student display. College recruiters were there. Art school representatives." My stomach dropped. "I didn't know, because you never asked." He cut me off. "You were too busy telling me art isn't a real career to notice that I might actually have talent." I reached for him, but he pulled away. "I'm sorry," I said, the words feeling woefully inadequate. "Everyone else's parents were there," he said, his voice breaking. "Even kids whose parents are divorced managed to both show up. And I had nobody." "You have me," I insisted. "Do I?" he asked, looking straight into my eyes. "Because most of the time it feels like I'm just a project to you, something to perfect, not someone to love." The raw pain in his voice stunned me into silence. For perhaps the first time I saw clearly the damage my approach to parenting had caused. This wasn't teenage dramatics or normal rebellion. This was genuine hurt years in the making. Before I could formulate a response, James stood up. "I'm going to bed," he said. "I have school tomorrow." "We should talk about this," I suggested weakly. "Now you want to talk?" he asked bitterly. "Now that it's convenient for you?" The next morning, I found an envelope on the kitchen table addressed to me. Inside was a brochure for Westfield Academy, a prestigious boarding school 4 hours away, along with an acceptance letter and scholarship offer. I confronted James when he came down for breakfast, waving the papers in my hand. "When were you going to tell me about this?" I demanded. He looked at me calmly, too calmly. "I just did." "You applied to boarding school without discussing it with me?" I asked incredulously. "How did you even manage the application process?" "Mrs. Kaplan helped me," he said simply. "She believes in me." The implication that I didn't believe in him stung. "You can't just decide something like this unilaterally. I'm your mother. I get a say." "Why?" he asked, his voice steady. "You've never been interested in what I want before." "That's not true," I protested. "It is true," he insisted, "and I just need to be somewhere else, somewhere I can breathe." Anger and hurt gave way to fear as the reality sank in. My son was planning to leave home. "You can't afford this," I said, grasping at practical objections. "Even with a scholarship, there are expenses." "I've been saving," he replied, "working at the art supply store on weekends, selling commissions online. I've got enough." The revelation that he'd been planning this escape for years, secretly working and saving, while I remained oblivious to his intentions, felt like a physical blow. "Why do you want to leave?" I asked, my voice small. James was silent for a long moment, seemingly weighing his words. When he finally spoke, his voice was tired, older than his 17 years. "You taught me love means pain," he said simply. "That caring makes you weak, that feelings should be hidden. I don't want to believe that anymore. I need to find out if there's another way to be." Those words, "You taught me love means pain," echoed in my head for hours afterward, haunting me as I mechanically went through the motions of my day. Had I really taught him that? Was that the sum total of my parenting? That love and pain were inextricably linked? As I drove home that evening, tears blurred my vision. I had failed my son in the most fundamental way possible. Not because I didn't love him, but because I had loved him in a way that caused harm rather than healing. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in our living room until dawn, turning over memories like stones in a riverbed, searching for the moment when things went wrong. But there was no single moment. It was 1,000 small dismissals, a lifetime of prioritizing achievement over emotional connection. The next morning I called my own mother, something I rarely did. Our relationship had always been strained, marked by the same emotional distance I'd unwittingly replicated with James. "Mom," I said when she answered, "did you ever regret how you raised me?" The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean? The way you and Dad were so strict, so focused on achievement. Did you ever think maybe there was another way?" There was a long silence on the line. "We wanted you to be strong," she finally said. "To be prepared for a world that doesn't care about feelings." "But did it make me strong?" I pressed. "Or did it just make me afraid to be vulnerable?" Another pause, longer this time. "Your father and I, we did what our parents did. We didn't know another way." For the first time, I heard uncertainty in my mother's voice, perhaps even regret. "I think I've done the same thing to James," I confessed, tears welling. "I've taught him that love hurts, that feelings are weakness." "Ella," my mother said softly, "you can still change that." I couldn't. It was too late for us when I realized. But it's not too late for you and James. That conversation, painful as it was, marked the beginning of my awakening. For the first time, I saw clearly the generational pattern I'd been perpetuating. The emotional detachment passed from my grandparents, to my parents, to me, and now threatening to shape James's future. I called in sick to work, something I never did, and spent the day immersed in reflection. I dug out old photo albums, watching James's progression from a smiling, open-faced child to the guarded teenager he'd become. In earlier photos, his eyes sparkled with curiosity and joy. In recent images, that light had dimmed, replaced by a cautious reserve I'd mistaken for maturity. Desperate for understanding, I went to the bookstore and purchased several books on emotional neglect and parenting. As I read descriptions of well-meaning parents who prioritized achievement over emotional connection, who taught their children to suppress feelings rather than express them, I saw myself with painful clarity. One passage in particular struck me. Children who learn that their feelings don't matter become adults who believe they don't matter. Was that the legacy I wanted to leave my son? A lifetime of believing he wasn't worthy of authentic connection, that his true self was somehow inadequate. I called Dr. Levine, James's therapist, and scheduled a private session. She listened without judgment as I poured out my realizations and regrets. "It's not too late," she assured me, echoing my mother's words. "James is still young and you're showing awareness now. That's the first step toward change." "But he wants to leave," I said. "He's applied to boarding school." "Perhaps some distance might actually help," she suggested gently. "It would give both of you space to work on yourselves individually before trying to rebuild your relationship." "How do I even begin to fix this?" I asked, feeling overwhelmed by the damage I'd done. "Start by listening," she advised. "Really listening without defending yourself or dismissing his feelings. Acknowledge the hurt you've caused, even if it was unintentional. And most importantly, be consistent in your efforts to change. One conversation won't undo years of patterns. The next day, I reached out to Mrs. Kaplan, swallowing my pride to ask for her insights about my son. She invited me to her classroom after school, where she showed me a portfolio of James's artwork I'd never seen. The pieces told a story of isolation and longing, solitary figures reaching toward light barriers between people hands, almost, but not quite touching. But there was also extraordinary beauty and technical skill that took my breath away. He's been working on these for years, Mrs. Kaplan explained. Art has been his outlet, his way of expressing what he couldn't say aloud. I had no idea, I whispered, tracing a particularly poignant image of a boy standing alone in a crowded room. James has remarkable talent, she said. But more than that, he has something to say. He just needs someone to listen. As I studied the pain and longing captured in my son's artwork, the full weight of my failure crashed down on me. I'd become exactly what I'd feared most, a replica of my own emotionally distant parents, perpetuating the cycle of disconnection I'd promised myself I would break. I left the school that day with James's portfolio tucked under my arm, my heart heavier than it had ever been. The evidence of his suffering, so beautifully rendered in line and color, was undeniable, and I had been blind to it all. My first attempt to apologize to James was awkward and ineffective. I caught him as he was heading out to school one morning, words tumbling out in a rush of emotion. James, I'm so sorry. I've been thinking about what you said about me teaching you that love means pain, and you're right. I've been a terrible mother. He looked at me with surprise, then wariness. Okay, he said slowly. I need to catch the bus. Can we talk tonight? I pressed. Please, I want to make things better. Sure, he said. But I could see he didn't believe me. Why would he? One emotional outburst couldn't undo years of emotional distance. That night I tried again, more carefully this time. I showed him the books I'd been reading, explained my conversations with his therapist and art teacher. I told him about calling my mother, about recognizing the generational patterns at play. I understand if you don't believe me, I said. Words are easy, but I'm committed to changing, to really seeing you and supporting you for who you are, not who I think you should be. James listened silently, his expression guarded. When I finished, he simply said, I need time, Mom. This is a lot. I know, I acknowledged. And you can have all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. In the weeks that followed, I began my own therapy, working to understand the roots of my parenting approach and develop healthier patterns. I learned about emotional validation, how to listen without immediately offering solutions or judgments. I practiced sitting with uncomfortable feelings instead of pushing them away or covering them with busyness. I made small changes in how I interacted with James. Instead of commenting on his grades, I asked about what he was learning. Instead of suggesting activities I thought would look good on college applications, I inquired about what truly interested him. When he shared something, a thought, a concern, an achievement, I practiced active listening, reflecting back what I heard without imposing my own agenda. At first, James was understandably suspicious of these changes. Why are you being weird? He asked one evening when I asked about his day, without immediately segueing into questions about homework or test scores. I'm trying to know you better, I answered honestly. The real you, not just the version of you I've been trying to create. He rolled his eyes, but I caught the hint of a smile before he turned away. The first real breakthrough came when I attended one of James's smaller art shows at a local cafe. I sat in the front row, studied each piece carefully, and afterward offered genuine specific praise about his technique and creativity. You actually liked it? He asked skeptically as we drove home. I was blown away, I said truthfully. Your use of light in that landscape piece was extraordinary. And the portrait series. James, I had no idea you could capture emotion like that. He glanced at me sideways. It's a little late for this, to suddenly be interested in my art. The comment stung, but I didn't get defensive. You're right, I acknowledged. I should have paid attention years ago. I missed so much by being focused on the wrong things. But I'm hoping it's not too late to start now. What if I still want to go to Westfield? He challenged. What if I still want to leave? Then I'll help you pack, I said, though the words hurt to say. And I'll call you every week and visit whenever you want me to, and be here waiting when you come home for breaks. I won't stop trying to rebuild what I broke, James, even if it takes years. Something shifted between us that night. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of possibility. A few weeks later, James asked if we could talk. We sat at the kitchen table where so many tense conversations had happened before. "I've been thinking about Westfield," he said. "About leaving." I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral, though my heart raced with anxiety. "And I'm not going," he said. "At least not yet." Relief flooded me, but I was careful not to show too much. "Can I ask what changed your mind?" He was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Kaplan said something that made me think. She said running away from problems just means you end up bringing them with you to a new place." "That sounds like Mrs. Kaplan." I smiled. "She also said," he hesitated, "that people can change if they really want to, that relationships can heal if both people are willing to do the work." He looked at me directly. "Are you willing to do the work at this?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "For as long as it takes." For the first time in years, he initiated a real conversation telling me about his art, his dreams of studying at a specialized program, the online community of young artists he'd connected with. I listened, really listened, without interjecting, without steering the conversation toward practical concerns or future plans. When he finished, I asked, "What can I do to support you in this?" The surprise on his face at that simple question showed how foreign the concept of unconditional support was to him, and that perhaps more than anything else illustrated how deeply I had failed him. "Just believe in me," he said finally. "That would be enough to start with." "I do believe in you, James," I said, meaning it completely. "And I'm so sorry it took me this long to show you that." 6 months have passed since that turning point conversation. James still lives at home, though he's been accepted to several art programs for college and will be leaving in the fall. He chose a school just 2 hours away, rather than the cross-country options he'd initially favored. When I asked why, he shrugged and said, "It might be nice to come home sometimes." Those words, "come home," gave me hope that perhaps our home was becoming a place of safety rather than tension. My therapy continues, helping me recognize and reshape the patterns ingrained by my own upbringing. I've learned that true strength isn't about suppressing emotions, but about acknowledging them and moving through them with courage. I've discovered that vulnerability, far from being weakness, requires tremendous bravery. These lessons have transformed not only my relationship with James, but my work as a counselor. I listen differently now to the students who come to my office, seeing beyond academic struggles to the emotional needs underneath. Several have commented on the change, saying they feel more comfortable opening up to me. James and I are still finding our way. There are awkward moments, setbacks, when old patterns reassert themselves. Trust rebuilds slowly, much slower than it breaks. But we're moving forward. We've established a weekly art night where James teaches me basic drawing techniques. I'm terrible at it, and we laugh together at my lopsided attempts at still life. Those evenings filled with relaxed conversation and shared activity have become precious to me in a way that his perfect test scores never were. We've had difficult conversations too, honest discussions about the past and how my parenting affected him. I've learned to listen without defending myself, to validate his experience, even when it's painful to hear. He's begun to share more of his thoughts and feelings tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, as he sees that I won't dismiss or minimize them. Last week, James showed me his newest painting, a piece he's been working on for months. It depicts two figures walking on a beach, waves washing away footprints behind them. The older figure reaches toward the younger, their fingers almost touching across a narrow gap. "It's about moving forward," he explained quietly. "About how the past doesn't disappear, but it also doesn't have to determine the future." I studied the painting, throat tight with emotion. "It's beautiful," I said, "and hopeful." "I think we're getting there," he replied, and for the first time in years, he initiated a hug. I held my son close, marveling at how tall he's grown, how his childhood has slipped away, while I was focused on molding him rather than knowing him. There's no way to reclaim those lost years, but perhaps we can build something new from here. A relationship based on acceptance, rather than expectation, on support rather than control. The journey of recovery continues with both setbacks and progress. I still catch myself slipping into old habits sometimes, focusing too much on outcomes, imposing my expectations. But now I recognize these moments and can course correct, apologizing when necessary, and recommitting to change. James has his own work to do, unlearning the harmful lessons I inadvertently taught him about emotions and self-worth. His therapist tells me he's making progress developing a healthier relationship with his own feelings and needs. Breaking generational patterns isn't easy or quick. The beliefs instilled in childhood run deep, shaping our automatic responses in ways we don't always recognize. But awareness is the first step toward change, and both James and I are now awake to the patterns that damaged our relationship. The most important lesson I've learned through this painful journey is that true love doesn't mean pain. It means safety. It means creating a space where someone can be their authentic self without fear of judgment or rejection. It means supporting growth rather than demanding perfection. I don't know what the future holds for James and me. Healing is not a straight line, but a winding path with unexpected turns. What I do know is that I will continue to show up, to listen, to honor who he is rather than who I once thought he should be. And perhaps someday when James thinks of love, he'll associate it not with pain, but with acceptance, not with conditions, but with constancy. Have you ever had a moment where words from someone you love stopped you in your tracks and made you question everything? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real conversations about parenting, healing, and growth. And remember, it's never too late to change the narrative and begin healing. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you courage on your own journey toward more authentic connections with those you love.